Modifiers are built-in computer routines that perform functions that would be tedious, if even possible otherwise. They modify the mesh non-destructively. That is, they change the mesh in some way, but until they are applied, they can be further changed or even removed. Modifiers are accessed in the Properties window under the Modifier tab, which looks like a wrench. Selecting Add Modifier brings up a pop-up menu with 52 different modifiers. Most of these you will not use to make Trainz assets. Here I will introduce the 9 modifiers that I have used the most often to make Trainz assets. There are 2 ways to bevel edges in Blender: the Bevel tool and the Bevel modifier. With the Bevel tool, you can bevel individual edges. With the Bevel modifier, you bevel all edges at once. To apply the Bevel modifier, in Object mode, you first select the object. Then in the Properties window, you select the Modifier tab. You then select Add Modifier, and in the pop-up menu, select Bevel. You can then make changes to the bevel, such as adding more segments or changing the amount of the bevel. If you change your mind and decide you don't want beveled edges, simply select the X icon to remove them. If you are happy with your bevels, you apply them by selecting the chevron and in the pop-up menu, select Apply. The Subdivision Surface modifier adds faces to a mesh. This is useful when you need to add more geometry to create a shape. If you apply the Subdivision Surface modifier to the cube is turned into a sphere, as if, like a drop of water, the surface is trying to shrink to its minimal area. Adding more faces smooths the sphere. If you switch to Edit mode, you will see an outline or box showing the original cube shape. You cannot apply a modifier in Edit mode. You must switch to Object mode before selecting the chevron and from the pop-up menu, Apply. Switching back to Edit mode, you can now select the added faces. The Solidify modifier adds thickness to a mesh. This might best be illustrated by using the plane primitive. To add the Solidify modifier, in Object mode you select the plane. Then in the Properties window you select the Modifier tab. You then select Add Modifier, and in the pop-up menu select Solidify. Nothing appears to happen because the initial thickness added is quite small. By dragging in the thickness field or entering a value, the thickness can be increased. In Object mode, selecting the chevron, and in the pop-up menu selecting Apply affixes the shape. The mirror modifier mirrors a mesh across its origin on its local X, Y, or Z axis. To illustrate the mirror modifier, let's use the cube and mirror on one of the faces. In object mode, you can rotate the cube on the Z axis. Keyboard shortcut R key followed by the Z key and drag. Now set the transformation orientation to local. Next, you move the cube's origin to one of the faces. In edit mode and face selection mode, you select a face, then using the keyboard shortcut Shift plus the S key, in the pie menu, select Cursor to Selected. Now in object mode, with the cube selected, you move the origin to the 3D cursor by selecting the Object menu, then Set Origin, then Origin to Cursor. Now you move the 3D cursor back to the world origin by selecting the keyboard shortcut Shift plus the S key and then selecting Cursor to World Origin. To add the mirror modifier, with the cube selected, in the Properties window, you select the Modifier tab. Then you select Add Modifier, and in the pop-up menu, select Mirror. Nothing appears to happen because you need to change the axis from the X-axis to the Y-axis. If you switch to Edit mode and X-ray mode, you can see that the originally selected face, to which you aligned the origin of the cube, is still present. This is easily deleted by selecting the face, then selecting the keyboard shortcut, the X key, followed by the F key. The Edge Split modifier selectively smooths edges. The edges to be smoothed can be determined by adjusting a parameter known as the edge angle. Let's illustrate the Edge Split modifier by using a cylinder. In object mode, after selecting the cylinder, you can select the Object menu and then Shade Smooth. Notice that not only the sides of the cylinder have been smoothed, but also the top rim. However, we want the rim to be sharp. To achieve a sharp rim, in the Properties window, you select the Modifier tab, then select Add Modifier, and in the list of modifiers, select Edge Split. You now have a sharp rim. Notice that the edge angle is set at 30 degrees by default. The edges to be sharpened can be selected by adjusting the edge angle. In this case, the default setting of 30 degrees sharpens the rim while leaving the side smooth. The Array modifier creates copies of a mesh. Each copy can be offset. Let's illustrate using the cube. In Object mode, you select the cube, and then in the Properties window, you select the Modifier tab. Select Add Modifier, then select Array. You can increase the count, say to 8, to make more copies, and you can specify an offset. The Decimate modifier is an interesting modifier that should be used with caution. It is designed to reduce the number of faces or polys in a mesh. This is useful for improving the performance of trains, but if overdone, can yield a poor representation of an object. Sometimes a suitable appearance cannot be maintained when the number of faces is reduced using the Decimate modifier. Let's illustrate the Decimate modifier using the default cube. You can increase the number of faces by first adding a Subdivision Surface modifier. In the Properties window, select the Modifier tab. Then select Add Modifier, and in the pop-up window, select Subdivision Surface. Increase the Levels viewport to, say, 4. To view the poly count of your mesh, you can select the overlay icon, and in the drop-down menu, check Statistics. The number you want to watch is the number of triangles shown in the left-hand corner of the screen. This is also known as the poly count, and needs to be less than 500 for the mesh to be imported into Trainz. Otherwise, you would need to create 2 or more meshes with decreasing numbers of polys, the last one having a poly count of 500 or less. To apply the Decimate modifier, you again select Add Modifier, and then select Decimate. To reduce the poly count, you reduce the ratio. If you reduce the ratio to 0.01, the mesh is still spherical, particularly when viewed from a distance. The poly count is less than 500. However, if you were to reduce the ratio to 0.001, the mesh would no longer be spherical. Note that here we have applied 2 modifiers to the same mesh. Neither permanently affects the mesh until applied. If you delete the modifiers, you revert to the original cube. The curve modifier is often used in combination with the array modifier to position copies of the mesh along a curve. Let's again illustrate using the cube. To apply the array modifier, in object mode, you select the cube, and then in the Properties window, you select the Modifier tab, then Add Modifier, and select Array. Then to add the Curve modifier, you switch to Top View using the keyboard shortcut the number pad 7 key. Next you add a Bezier circle by selecting the Add menu, then Curve, then Circle. To enlarge the circle, you open the Properties panel using the keyboard shortcut the N key and change the dimensions of X and Y from 2 meters to 20 meters. If need be, zoom out to see the circle. To apply the curve modifier, in the outline window you select the cube. In the Properties window you select the Modifier tab, then select Curve. In the Curve object field you select Bezier curve. The copies of the cube will align themselves around the circle. You can increase the offset to 1.5, then fill the circle by increasing the count field to 21. The lattice modifier is another interesting modifier that allows you to deform the shape of a mesh. Let's again illustrate using the cube. We'll switch to edit mode using the keyboard shortcut the Tab key, and front view using the keyboard shortcut the numberpad 1 key. We'll also switch to X-ray mode by selecting the X-ray icon. To subdivide the cube, you select the cube using the shortcut the A key, and then in the Edge menu, select Subdivide. In the Options window in the lower left-hand corner, you can increase the number of cuts to 4. Now, after switching to Object mode, you add a lattice by selecting the Add menu followed by Lattice. In the Options window, you increase the radius to, say, 2.2 meters, so that the lattice surrounds the cube. In the Properties window, you select the Lattice tab and increase the W resolution to 4. Now in the Outline window, you select the cube, and in the Properties window, you select the Modifier tab, then Add Modifier, and select Lattice. In the Object field, you select Lattice. Then, with the lattice selected, you can switch to Edit mode. Box select the center vertices of the lattice and scale. Keyboard shortcut S key and drag. This will cause the cube to bow out along the x-axis.